grilled cheese on our leftover cheddar cheese and green onion bread. And then we're going to bake up some kind of Valentine's Day themed blondies. So we're going to get started on the blondies because they kind of take the longest to bake for this. Blondies are super easy but delicious recipe. Just think about blondies as being brownies without the chocolate, since it's kind of the base thing for it. Brownies, blondies, kind of get it there. We're going to start with 1 cup of butter, so that's 2 sticks, and you want it to be melted. We're going to add that in here. Get all of that. And then we're going to add in 1.5 cups of brown sugar. So that's kind of where the blondies get their rich flavor from. I like to use light brown sugar. If you want a little bit more of that molasses kind of kick in it, you could use dark brown, but light brown is my preferred. And there we go. So we got 1/2 cup, and we're going to make sure they're firmly popped or firmly packed down, and we want 1.5 cups. So I'm going to do 3 of these. So 2, and then 1 more. Scoop it up in there. So 1.5 cups of firmly packed brown sugar, and we're going to cream that butter into the sugar, which will be really easy since the butter is melted. But that just allows these to kind of come together a little bit nicer. You don't want them to be a cookie, but more like a brownie in texture. So we're going to mix it until we've got that all kind of mixed up. And then we're going to add in 2 eggs. Make sure you I'm just going to cream it to make sure there's no clumps in the brown sugar because you want it to be as smooth as possible. It almost looks like a caramel. And then we're going to add in 2 eggs. We got 1 and 2. Give my hands a quick rinse. And we'll mix those in. We're going to pop the yolks so that they kind of mix in nicely. And we'll incorporate these eggs into our brown sugar and our butter base. So again, we just have 1 cup of melted butter and then 1.5 cups of brown sugar. And now we're going to add in our 2 eggs to this. And we'll mix it until it's completely incorporated into it. And here we go. And then we are going to add in a tablespoon of vanilla. And this is where you get that great flavor of it. It's just like when I make my chocolate chip cookies, I use a lot of vanilla, but it is worth it. It's so good. So 1 tablespoon of vanilla extract. And then we're going to do a teaspoon of baking powder and a teaspoon of salt. Now, if you are going to use unsalted butter, you might want to use a little bit more salt for that, but I always use salted. So here's a teaspoon of salt. And here is a teaspoon of baking powder. We're going to mix those in, and then it will be time for the flour, and we'll have the base to our blondies, and then we'll add in our mix-ins. So just make sure that baking powder, the vanilla, and that salt gets mixed around well. Here. You can see it's going to be a nice, rich, and thick batter for this because it's a nice butter base for it. But it's mixed in well, and now we're going to add in 2 cups of all-purpose flour. So 1 and 2. We'll mix those in, and then it will be time to add in our mix-ins, which you can do a lot of different things, but we're going to do kind of a Valentine's Day themed one today. But we're going to mix this all the way in until all of that brown or that flour is mixed into our base. With this, you don't have to worry about over mixing it. It's not like a muffin where you want it to be light and fluffy. These, you want them to be chewy and delicious. So mix them until you don't see that flour anymore. And you could always use a hand mixer for this, but it's such an easy batter to mix together that I just do it with a spoon. Here we go. So here is our base for this. And it smells just got that wonderful vanilla smell to it. And it's very different texture-wise than like a chocolate chip cookie. So it's not just the same thing as, oh, putting a chocolate chip cookie dough in a base for it. It's, it's more runny, I should say. We are going to use some red mini M&Ms and then some white chocolate chips for our blondies because I love white chocolate chips in the blondies. My husband's not so excited about that, but for him. I have found that at Christmas time, I buy Christmas M&Ms. I buy a lot of them because at Christmas you can use them for this. And then I take the time to sort them out to where I have red for Valentine's Day and I have green for St. Patrick's Day. That way I got my themes covered. I don't have to go through all the colors. It's just a couple ones and I don't have to buy a whole bunch of other ones. I know they make specialty ones, but that's just entirely going to the store too many times. And these are always on sale, like right after Christmas. They all get all their inventory out. That's when you buy them and stock up on them. Okay, we're going to add it in. You want about a cup of mix-in. So you can add in nuts. I love white chocolate macadamia nuts, pecans, walnuts. Sometimes I use peanut butter M&Ms when I do, when Easter's around and they make the peanut butter M&Ms. Those make my favorite blondies. So I had about a half a cup of those, and then we're going to mix with the other half a cup with white chocolate chips. You want to use a good quality white chocolate chip. It does make a difference. That is one of those things where I really notice the difference in the flavors. With chocolate chips, cheap is fine, but white chocolate, because you're really tasting that cocoa butter, it does make a difference. We're going to mix these all the way through. And then we will grease our pan and we'll put these in the oven to bake up. Okay, looking pretty cute. Here we go. So we're gonna, this makes a 9 by 13 inch pan. So I've got my big one. I like to bake mine in a metal pan. Same with brownies. I feel like metal makes the best kind of chewy crust on it. So we're gonna grease it down so that it will slide out nicely. Also, this conducts the heat the best. If you cook it in a ceramic or glass one, you have to cook it a little bit longer because it doesn't conduct the heat as quickly through it. And then we're going to spoon these out and we'll spread them out. These aren't super thick ones, and that allows them to cook up a little bit faster, but they are very, very rich. So we'll spoon this out, and then we're going to spread it all the way around till we have a nice kind of thin layer on it. The eggs and the baking powder will cause them to puff up a little bit. But it just allows them to bake a little bit more evenly. If you make them too thick, then what happens is your edges get more cooked up than your middle. And nobody wants a dried out blondie. But we're not going to waste any of this right here. We're going to get every little bit off because these are a family favorite. Get that last little bit in there. I just sneak a taste because who doesn't love cookie dough? So now we're just going to use our spatula and spread them out.
You have a question? Is that peanut butter?
This is not peanut butter. This is our Blondie mix. So it is just made with a cup of butter, 1.5 cups of brown sugar, 2 eggs, a teaspoon of baking powder, a tablespoon of vanilla, a teaspoon of salt, 2 cups of flour, and then a cup of our mix-ins, which we used red mini M&Ms and white chocolate chips for a cute little Valentine's Day themed, because I'm a pretty big holiday person here. I like my holidays. So my husband used to always call me a little bit crazy, and then he kind of came around to it. He gets into it because I think he likes all the treats and everything like that. Now, he's not too crazy when I'm like, I need you to go up and get the decorations up into our attic. And, Christmas and Halloween, it gets a little intense when I have like 30 tubs of decorations. The mini holidays, I just have 2 or 3, so it's not so bad. But delicious. These are going to go in at 350 for about 25 to 30 minutes. Every oven is different. We're going to see. I normally bake these in my wall oven, so we're going to start with 25, and then we'll check them out on there because I've noticed this one sometimes takes a little bit longer. I'm going to set my timer. There we go. Perfect. And get that little brown sugar to the side. Let's get started on our soup here. So we're going to saute up some Italian sausage, then we'll throw in some onions. We're going to be making a ratatouille soup, which is just essentially think about a ratatouille and turning it into a soup form on it. And I have this eggplant that I want to use up because it got a little bit frosty. And so, once it's kind of a vegetable freezes, you got to use it up really quickly for dethaws. But I love eggplant, and ratatouille is one thing. I was almost thinking, eggplant parmesan soup, but I didn't quite have the ingredients for that. But how delicious would be like a creamy tomato basil soup with a fried eggplant on top of it? So good. But maybe for another day, another creation. I love making lots of different soups. Let's get our sausage kind of sauteed up in here. I'm just going to chunk it apart for this. That way we have some nice little sausage, protein in here. You could always leave it out and have it just a vegetarian soup if you wanted. And we'll let that kind of cook up. While that's starting to heat up and cook, we are going to prep up our veggies. We'll get our onion and we'll get our firm aromatic vegetables first. So our onions, carrots, celery, and then we'll add in garlic, and then we'll do peppers, and then eggplant, and then lastly tomatoes before we put it in our broth to stew. So get this guy diced up here. And then we're going to make a lovely grilled cheese using some of our leftover sourdough from last night. Some different types of cheddar cheese because it's a cheddar cheese and green onion sourdough, so it will play really well on it as well. So just a small little dice for this. Bring that right over here, and we'll have that one. Turn this up just a smidge. And then let's get our carrots. I've got kind of a mixture of carrots here. Yellow, looks like a white, and some orange carrots. Add a little pops of color throughout. And peel these guys up. And then we'll dice them up. And they'll be ready to go in as well. I want my sausage to be kind of completely cooked up before we add in our onions for this. I'm just going to wait for my Dutch oven to get nice and toasty. Yeah. But think about for this soup, because I'm kind of just like, I had the eggplant. I was like, oh, what should I do? What should I do? And I'm like, well, you know what? Everything that you put in a ratatouille would make a great base for a soup. So we're kind of just playing on that. We're going to use some Italian seasoning as our spices. For it, we'll have a lovely, like a lighter broth. I do have some cherry tomatoes that we will kind of quarter and put in there. But it'll be a lovely veggie kind of base soup for it. And our last one here. Here we go. These are very small ones, so we have quite a few of them. They're practically a baby carrot. And get these guys kind of cubed up. And off. These are great vegetables. While you don't typically find carrots and celery in a ratatouille, they will add great flavor to the broth, which I find is really important, giving those aromatic things. And they're just a really good hearty substance base. You'll have the lighter ones with the peppers and the eggplant on here and the tomatoes, but these are going to give that robust flavor for it. And then we'll get some of these chopped up. Again, I'm going to do smaller dicing on it because I don't want to have really big chunks of carrots, but more smaller little pieces throughout, kind of like when you do a ratatouille and how it's kind of chopped up, you know, nicely. Here. And if you're ever curious, the carrots, red, white, purple, orange, yellow, they all taste the same. Slightly sweeter. The orange variety is slightly sweeter, which is why it's the most popular variety, but they're all the same. And you know, carrots originally weren't orange. They were actually they were like a hybrid between two that the Dutch farmers kind of created in like the 16 or 1700s. And let's get these guys diced up. And then we're going to give our sausage a little bit of a stir here on there. And then we'll prep up our celery, our peppers, and kind of our little veggies.
Do you know why they made them orange?
Because when you mix two colors, they turn orange. The red ones and the yellow ones. I don't know.
Curry favorite. King. The official color was orange.
Ah, even back then.
Yeah.
I guess you're right. It would be interesting. I just know the Dutch were good farmers. They were really good with the tulips and their tulip mart. And how they could manage to make tulip bulbs a currency worth more than gold at one point in time. There we go. And almost have that nice and broken up into little chunks there. I don't want them to be super small, but I want them to have a little kind of base thing. Sometimes I only had like the ground one, but if I get the links, I'll snip the sausage link and it's almost like a little sausage ball. Okay, we've got our onions, we've got our carrots. Let's do our celery. Kind of take off our base for this. And our tops, because those tend to dry out a little bit. Keep your leaves. The celery leaves have a really light celery flavor to them, but are lovely. Again, these celery stalks are pretty large, so I'm just going to slice them down to thin them out. The celery is going to add a wonderful aromatic note. I'm going to actually take some of this and keep it to the side. Note to the soup. And really enhance the broth base of it because this is going to be a lighter kind of broth. It's not going to be a heavy tomato broth. We'll have some fresh diced tomatoes in there that will add a little bit of acidity to it. And we're going to use chicken bouillon and some fresh and some herbs, but it's going to be lighter. Yeah. And give our sausage here a little bit, man overboard, a little bit of help here. Now that it's cooked up, I always like to see exactly how much fat is going to be in my sausage before I add any oil. I'm going to use just a little bit because it looks like it's a little bit leaner, about a teaspoon. That way we can kind of crisp it up nicely. There. And we'll get those mixing around and kind of got it cut.
Marianne.
Oh, thank you, Marianne. We appreciate that. Okay. Once we get that one up here, there's just about on it. We'll get there. We'll move up here and we'll get our next thing. So when we'll add them in, my rule of thumb is when we're making our base for a broth or stew, you're always going to start with your onion. Onion is number one. It just needs its time on its own. Then you're going to go firmest to softest, starting with your aromatic veggies, and then we'll move to the next one. So then we're going to go carrots and celery. You can kind of do them at the same time. And then after carrots and celery, we will do our peppers because they're firmer, our eggplant, and then lastly our tomatoes because they're the softest and the juiciest. And this way they all get a good saute on them for it. So we'll prep this up, and then we'll throw in, after our celery and our carrots, we're going to throw in some fresh garlic. And we've got about 5 little small sweet peppers here. You could also use a bell pepper if you wanted to. I like the sweet peppers. They're a little bit more mild in flavor, less kind of bitter. I'm almost tempted. I have some serrano peppers left over, but when I was cutting them up, my fingers burned for so long, and I could not get them to stop burning. But they were delicious. One serrano pepper was wonderful for our entire pot of chili. That's just how much heat they add. Normally I use like 3 to 4 jalapenos, but they didn't have very good jalapenos at the store, so I just grabbed some serrano ones, and whew, spicy.
You should add a disclaimer that you can't handle.
I can't handle any spice. I even think regular pepper, if it's freshly cracked, is spicy. So yeah, I'm not a good judge of character. I'm like the biggest wimp when it comes to that. Although there are a few things that I can handle that don't bother me, like sriracha, I don't find spicy, which a lot of people find really spicy. So that, whatever that heat, doesn't get me. Okay, we got our sausage here. We're keeping it in our pot for this. It's going to really enhance the flavor of our soup. And the meat doesn't lose. It's not going to overcook anymore because it's a ground meat. Add our onions in here. Kind of mix it around. Let it get a little bit of that heat on the bottom of our pan. And get that going. While that's kind of cooking for the first part here, let's get our sandwiches starting to prep up, because grilled cheese always takes a hot minute, and that way we can have them going on our thing. I'm going to get this starting off nice and low. So this is all that was left over from our sourdough last night. We made a cheddar cheese and green onion sourdough. So you can see our green onions in there, lots of cheddar cheese that we did during the, as you can see, during the lamination process. So you have this cheese swirl. I used a fine grater, my Parmesan grater to be exact, to grate the cheese. So it was actually smaller little bits of it, because I like a smaller piece of cheese versus a big chunk of it, because I find the bigger chunks really can weigh down it and almost make the texture of the sourdough a little bit different. Here, get these guys kind of cut up and going. But it's interesting. So it's kind of like, I look at it and it just reminds me of like a cinnamon swirl bread, but with cheese. A cheese swirl bread.
Speaking of which, didn't you make one up?
I do. I have a cinnamon swirl one in the fridge that I can bake up. I actually have another and a regular one. So I've got some sourdough in there ready to bake. Apparently I jump and ship over here. Okay, let's get our carrots in. And get those. We'll let those cook for a second, then we'll add our celery.
Do you know what you're making for dinner?
I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm not 100% sure what our evening schedule is, so it's kind of moving around and figuring that out, and then what time that gives me. So I'm not sure. I do have a whole chicken that I might be roasting up, because we've had red meat a couple of nights in a row, and we had fish recently. So I'm like, I'm like, okay, I may be ready to move on to chicken on there. And my kids love it when I make the roast chicken. So I think we might do that tonight. And because our kids don't have school tomorrow, so I can, it's nice. They have a whole midwinter break, because, winter break and spring break, there's apparently too much time between the two, and the kids need another break from school.
Can you add potatoes to this recipe?
You could definitely add potatoes on there. I would do it like a baby Dutch, or like a waxier potato would be things, because a russet would probably, dissolve away into the soup. So Yukon, red potato, baby Dutch, those would all be great.
And how was the butcher box made?
It was fabulous. So my like my husband and I were talking about it, and he was like, it was so much tender than the previous cuts that we're getting, and it was really, really delicious. All the kids liked it. So it was definitely so far that we've only had one thing out of it, but that first thing we've had was very, very delicious. I have a sirloin cap defrosting in there, and I think I can't remember what I put for. I have like I'll take a couple of pieces out at a time in there. So I grabbed another piece of meat out there, but I can't remember what it was that I have in there. So we'll get there. We're gonna put. I've got some. This is a white cheddar cheese, and then we're gonna add some salami for this. Now, normally I don't do salami and cheddar cheeses together, but I really wanted to do cheddar cheese with this bread because I feel like a cheddar cheese bread needs cheddar cheese. And I am like out of sandwich meats. It was either salami or prosciutto, and I wasn't going to waste prosciutto on cheddar cheese, So I'll do this. I'm going to make this one extra meaty. You know what? They both can be, but that one will get more than this one. That way I can use up the rest. And then I'm going to do for my top layer, I've got a good old nice regular cheddar. So double cheddar salami. And I'm just going to put the cheese. I'm fine with the meat overlapping, but I don't like my cheese to overlap where my bread's not going to be because I find that if it melts when you do the flip, then it will burn. Trying to see which one. I think that one's the bigger one. That one's a smaller one. We'll get these cooking up. I'm going to start them on right around a 5, so medium heat. We'll do 2 flips on each side so that they have a chance to heat up, and then the second flip is for crisping. Let's add in our celery, and then we're going to mince up some garlic. We'll get that in. The nice thing about this soup is once the sauteing process is jump-starting the cooking process for all of these vegetables, so they will get tender fairly quickly once we get them all in there. But they really bring out a great flavor. That caramelization and that sauteed flavor that happens just enhances the broth base for this soup. So we'll get that celery in there. And then we'll get some garlic up, and then we'll add in our peppers, and then our eggplant, and lastly, our tomatoes. But both eggplant and tomatoes will add out a lot of liquid, so you want to do them last. But the tomatoes add out the most liquid, so. And once you put them in there, you won't get a good saute them on them anymore.
Have you ever tried making any Jamaican cuisine?
I've done a few things before, but not a whole lot. And I always keep saying, I'm like, oh, I need to try some more like Caribbean-based foods because I really do enjoy them. When we've had them at restaurants or there's like a little food truck here that's called like Jamaica Me Happy, a food truck. They have a wonderful name. I just love it. And it's always so delicious. And I just, you know what I mean? I feel like I just have to go and explore it a little bit more and make sure I do it justice when I go on there because it is delicious. And that's kind of how when I want to try like to learn a new cuisine, I eat a lot of it for a while so that I really get the flavors down, and I try to read up on it and study it so that I understand how they're making their flavor combinations on there. Because as I said, I'm not much of a recipe girl. I like to create my own, but I have to understand how the bases are made first, and then I kind of take those flavor profiles and go from on there. We're going to give our garlic a good mince up here. This is a good amount of garlic, about a tablespoon and a half here, but I really want that flavor to pop through because that's just a strong, wonderful flavor in a ratatouille. There we go. Almost feel like I should have gotten Mousy out. So Mousy is this stuffed animal that I got when I was 3 years old. And I still have it. So it's 35 years old. And it is it's a favorite animal between my kids and all of my nieces and nephews. They just love Mousy. It's a giant like mouse with a really long tail. And I just feel like he needed to be out here because of the movie Ratatouille. Although he lost part of his tail a couple of years ago. I still have it. I just need to sew it back on.
In a movie, it's a rat.
You know, I know, but mouses, rats. You know, if he's like
Mice
King,
is plural.
yeah, you're right. Mice is the plural. But it's like, what is it? King Ratican from The Great Mouse Detective. Even though he was a rat, he did not want to be called a rat. He was a mouse. So maybe Ratatouille wants to be considered a mouse. So we've got our garlic in there. We'll let that heat up for just a second. And then we'll get our peppers and we'll get our eggplant going and our tomatoes. There. Kind of give it a mix around.
Oh, what's the meat in there?
That is Italian sausage. So that's just going to play really well with the kind of the ratatouille, those kind of flavors with it. But you could always add in like a shredded chicken later if you're not in love with a, Italian sausage. We've got our eggplant here. I'm going to cube it up for this dish so that it in smaller little chunks on it. Eggplant, I have found, is like a giant sponge. So it's going to soak up whatever flavors that you have in your soup for it. Sometimes I will say one of my favorite soups, although I just did a curry soup, is I do a curry eggplant soup, and it's delicious. But I was like, we just did curry, so I had to branch out and try something different for it. And then we'll check on our grilled cheese here. We'll see if I have it on pretty low, so I'm just waiting for a nice little sizzle melt on it. Slide this guy under, flip it over. Again, this is our first round where we're just melting everything, heating it up so that it can really start on the grilled cheese process. That second round is when we're going to get the crispiness of it.
Is zucchini a good substitute for eggplant?
Yes. Actually, if I had zucchini, I would totally throw in some zucchini with this recipe, as well as like yellow squash. Any summer squash really works well with this. I know eggplant isn't everybody's favorite, one because of that its texture can get to you. But if you cook it long enough and it's there, it's really lovely for it. But yes, zucchini, that's a great, great substitute for it. Even mushrooms can work as well. They kind of give you a little bit of that spongy base for it. I love eggplant, but I have always thought that I was mildly allergic to raw eggplant because if I eat raw eggplant, my tongue tingles. But if I have cooked eggplant, it doesn't do that. So I don't know if there's something that happens during the cooking process, but I love eggplant. It's never stopped me from eating it. Okay, we've got a thing. Make sure you do cut up your zucchini skin small because they will hold together firmly, and that way you'll have your nice little chunks in it. Yeah. Before we toss these in, I'm going to, I forgot to put my garlic salt out. Let me grab my garlic salt real quick. I want to just season up the eggplant because eggplant, again, is like a sponge, and I want it to take some of those flavors a little bit better. So we're going to put a little bit of garlic salt over it. And then I'm going to just do a little bit of Italian seasoning on it. And we're going to add all these spices in our soup, but I want these to kind of cling onto it. And then I'm just going to toss them with a light drizzle of olive oil. You could always roast your eggplant up too and then add them to your soup at the very end as well. That brings out a little bit more of that flavor and richness of it. We're just going to give it a light coat to have those spices kind of cling on there. Now, just be careful with how much oil you add because, like I said, eggplant is a sponge and it will just soak up everything. I'm going to add it in here. It's going to let out a good amount of liquid here in just a second. So I'm going to wash my hands real quick and then we will give it a good toss. Kind of coat it up. And then we'll let it saute on here. And then we'll prep up our tomatoes. And we'll get those in there with some of our spices, and then we'll put our broth in to let it simmer. But this cooking process, most of our vegetables should be nice and tender already, and have this great flavor forming. But you can see it's going to be just so full of veggies and everything. So while those are heating up, I'm going to add in a bit more Italian seasoning. I'm going to add in about a teaspoon to go kind of all around to flavor this up. I want them to steam up before I mix them in. Because I love oregano, we're going to add in about a teaspoon of oregano on top of that, which is already in Italian seasoning, but I love the flavor even more. And we already have a teaspoon and a half of garlic in here. We're going to add in, looks like 2 small bay leaves. And we're just going to let that steam here for a second. And that steam will rehydrate those spices. Let me grab my pot holders. We're going to check on our blondies and see if they're ready for this. Sometimes now, I haven't cooked blondies in this oven. I normally cook them in my other one, so we'll see if they need a little bit more time or not. You know what? They look perfect. Now, with blondies, just like with brownies, you want to make sure that you do not cut into them until they have completely cooled, because you need that butter and that egg to set. And so they will be really like gooey until they have cooled off. So it's that waiting game. I always tell my children, you're going to have to wait, but it will be worth the wait. Beautiful. Let's get this flipped over on here. And we'll get our spices now that they've had a chance to steam up in here. Beautiful. Okay. I'm going to get my broth simmering, then we'll get our tomatoes in, and then we can finish off our soup with some fresh parsley as well. I'm going to add in about a cup of water. We're going to add in a big scoop of chicken bouillon towards the end, but I'm going to start with a little bit. Scrape the bottom of your pan. You're essentially using that first little bit to deglaze the bottom with those spices, which will allow them to really like infuse into the broth. There we go. Add another cup more. Kind of mix it around. Push everything down. There we go. Beautiful. And now we're going to add in a nice heaping spoonful of chicken bouillon. You could also use vegetable bouillon for this as well. For it. Those both flavors are well. I will say the chicken just kind of really is a little bit lighter in color, so kind of enhances it. You can see our grilled cheese is forming there. We've got it nice and melting, almost ready on that, which is perfect because once we add in our tomatoes and this comes to a simmer, we'll chop up some fresh parsley to top it off with. But our soup is fairly close because most of the work is done sauteing up the vegetables like you're making a ratatouille. And then we're going to add in our base. Since I'm almost out of chicken bouillon, I'm going to put a little bit more of this. You need about 4 teaspoons, enough to make kind of, a heaping tablespoons, 4 cups of water, 4 teaspoons per cup. We'll mix this in. We'll let that simmer.
You have a question. Someone wants to make the birthday cake you made for Evie. Does that need to be refrigerated with the frosting?
When I do my crumb coat, after my crumb coat, I chill it and then I put the frosting on it. But after that, you don't have to. I find that you don't want to eat it right out when it's cold because the butter will be firm. So if you do refrigerate it till when you want to use it, you need to let it sit for at least 30 minutes to an hour before serving so that the buttercream can come to room temperature. So it doesn't need to be refrigerated on there because they're baked, and then the butter and the sugar, it's shelf stable on the counter for that. So you don't have to. But if you want to, I will say after your crumb coat, because, you cool it, you do your crumb coat, and I chill it so that that crumb coat is nice and firm so that when you do your second coat, it goes on really, really smooth for that. Okay, we're gonna add in some cherry tomatoes for this. I'm just gonna have them up on there. You could also add in a can of diced tomatoes or, some vine ripe, like 3 to 4 vine ripe tomatoes as well. I had just a bunch of little containers of these that were kind of past their prime for like the snacking or putting on their salads, but not bad, but they're perfect to go into the soup. You just don't want to leave them whole. If you leave them whole, then they're going to turn into like little molten lava balls because they'll get so hot in the soup broth, but then you bite into them, they'll like splash you. Here we go. Get these. This will add a nice little acidity to our broth base here. So it's going to be about 2 cups or so, 1.5 cups to 2 cups, so around 1 can. Give this a good stir in. We'll let it simmer for just a second. Beautiful. And then what we're going to do is we're going to top this with a good amount of fresh parsley. You could also use fresh basil if you have it, or fresh oregano. Those are all great, finishing herbs for this. I'm going to give this a good mix, and then I'm going to take a quick taste to see if I want to add any more bouillon or spices before we kind of finish that up. I don't think we need any more for that. Let's check these guys out. See, we're almost close on it. Looks pretty close. I'll slide this over. They're just about done. As you can see, our cheese is starting to melt. I have them on nice and low. So let's get.
You get a question quite a bit. The soup looks amazing. How does the cameraman do with all those veggies?
The cameraman eats the sandwich and he picks out the meat, unless it's a soup that he loves, like a beef stew or whatnot. This soup is made mainly for me, my parents, and then I will say my little boys love soups and they'll eat it no matter what. The cameraman will eat the Blondies and the sandwich, which is why we have a wide variety on there. I go more adventurous during lunchtime because my kids are at school, and I will say my little boys are, the kids are more adventurous than the cameraman. But and my lunchtime meals are more aimed for my parents and I. Because if I had to eat the way my husband would like to eat, we'd have steak and potatoes every single day.
Nothing wrong with that.
And while we love it, I would get tired of it. Although I think my kids would all agree, they all love steak and potatoes, except Evie. She loves steak, but she does not love potatoes. We're going to add a good amount of fresh parsley at the very end to this. You could also grate some fresh Parmesan cheese over it, but we'll mince it up. We'll add a nice little fresh burst to it. Looks like that. It's a bay leaf right there. Give this a stir. I like to add my tomatoes in last to keep them again fresh. I don't want them to overcook so much to where they separate from the skin, but really more of a fresh pop at the very end. You can see our eggplant is pretty much cooked all the way through because it's nice and it's more translucent. It's not as white. So when it's more white and opaque, that means it is still needs cooking on it for it. But let's give this a nice stir here. Slide this guy up. And one more little taste. And then I think we'll be about ready to serve up. So good. And then we're going to add in our fresh. And this is a good amount of fresh parsley. It's going to add a pop of green, but it will add just a nice, really happy note on there. It's kind of like a finishing herb. Because parsley, once you cook it up, it really has no flavor. Beautiful. Okay. Get this guy turned off. I'm going to slide my Blondies a little bit farther again. They may look ready to cut into, but make sure you wait until your Blondies are cool, just like with brownies, because otherwise you'll be like, oh, they're not done. But they are. They just need to firm up.
How long does that take?
About, I want to say 30 minutes to an hour. It just can vary on how thick they are. The cameraman's like, I really want to, but if you try to cut into them, they'll be like, first of all, like lava, very, very hot. But they just need to set. Cookies cool off much faster and set typically within 5 minutes. Brownies and blondies take longer because they have a thicker base to it. Let's get ready for this deliciousness. Take those crumbs. And let's grab a ladle here. I'm very excited about my soup.
Could you take them out and put them on a cooling rack?
You can, but the problem is sometimes during the transfer process, it can be delicate and you can end up breaking it. And so I always just like to keep it in the pan until it's cool, and then transfer it out to cut them. Or most of the time we end up just cutting them in the pan. And I'm always like, gently, children, use a plastic spatula, not a knife, because they always end up cutting my pans up. Although they're not as bad as my stepdad. My stepdad, I'm always like, I always bring there, I'm like, I always tell my mom, don't let him cut into that pan. Don't let him use a knife in there because he'll ruin it. And he's like, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Okay, let's get our grilled cheeses here. Get these nice and cut up. So look at our beautiful homemade sourdough grilled cheese on our sourdough and green onion and cheddar bread with salami, and then white cheddar and yellow cheddar cheese. So perfect little deliciousness that we toasted up, and we are going to serve that with our ratatouille soup made with Italian sausage, eggplant, carrots, celery, sweet peppers. We have a lovely kind of fragrant broth that we seasoned up with Italian spices, oregano, and a little bit of chicken bouillon. And then for dessert, when they set in about, I would say, 30 to 40 minutes, we have our happy little Valentine's Day blondies. So we have a rich kind of brown sugar and butter base to these blondies with a hint of vanilla in them. And then, of course, some white chocolate chips and red mini M&Ms for a cute little pop of color. But delicious. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made. We've got our ratatouille soup and our Valentine's Day blondies, and you can always watch and cook along with us again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. It has our hex-clad pans, our Dutch ovens, our knives, cutting boards, all the different things we use in the kitchen we have there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.